La radio du Salon de la radio. L'Angleterre, pays à l'honneur de l'année 2017.
On est en direct de la radio du Salon de la radio avec Broadcast-associés, Vizion'R, Multicam, Maxi, RCS, Safe Diffusion et puis merci encore à Towercast qui nous aide à diffuser sur RNT à Paris. Vous nous écoutez, vous nous regardez sur salondelaradio.com avec des before durant ces 3 journées. On est là jusqu'à mardi. Rendez-vous ici du côté de la grande halle de la Villette avec tous les professionnels qui sont réunis. Et puis si vous n'avez pas la chance de vous déplacer, de venir jusqu'à nous, eh bien grâce à cette radio du Salon de la radio, vous pouvez suivre en direct toutes les conférences qui sont filmés et également en audio et puis des before avec là 2 invités exceptionnels puisque vous le savez cette année c'est l'Angleterre qui est à l'honneur. Welcome Great Britain. Voilà, j'ai essayé d'améliorer un peu mon anglais pour l'occasion mais ça va pas être facile, donc on a la chance d'avoir Nolwenn qui va faire un peu de traduction parce que sinon je pense que je vais complètement me noyer. Alors ce before de cette conférence sur les radios communautaires et contenus locaux en Angleterre se fera là dans quelques instants ici et vous verrez la conférence en live avec 2 intervenants. Tout d'abord Dom Chambers de Summer Valley FM. Bonjour Dom. Hello Dom. Voilà. c'est le direct. Et puis Will Jackson également de Radio Independents Groups. Voilà, ça va la prononciation, it's okay, yeah. Donc Dom Chambers voilà, s'occupe de Summer Valley FM, c'est le radio manager. Alors c'est une station qui émet en Angleterre sur une large zone du nord-est du Somerset, pour ceux qui connaissent le Somerset, sur le 97.5 FM. La radio existe depuis 2008, donc c'est assez récent quand même comme radio. Et il faut savoir que selon une récente étude marketing, plus de 48% de la population de la zone couverte par la radio connaît la radio et environ 16% l'écoute au moins une fois par semaine, ce qui est assez énorme quand même en termes de résultats. Je pense que ça fait rêver pas mal de radios locales ici. Et puis c'est une des radios les plus citées parmi la profession en Angleterre, avec par exemple en 2013 le titre de la radio de l'année pour le sud-ouest chez nos voisins anglais. Dom Chambers qui est venu jusqu'ici pour nous parler notamment stratégie et développement d'une radio régionale. Will Jackson lui gère Radio Independence Group. C'est certainement le plus à même de nous parler habitude d'écoute, panel, diversité des auditeurs et puis de tout ce qui tourne autour du média radio en Angleterre. Alors, c'est parti pour les questions. Tout d'abord, j'aurais voulu savoir quels sont les formats radio qui fonctionnent le mieux en Angleterre.
What kind of radio are the best in Great Britain, in UK, in the UK?
What kind of radio am I talking about?
Which type of formats?
Okay, I'm gonna be talking about community radio. But firstly, can I say it's wonderful to be speaking on a French-speaking station and genuinely a new experience for me. My apologies for not speaking French. It is wonderful when you hear a language that you don't understand. It becomes like music, like a wonderful audio wallpaper.
Alors, il dit que c'est les radios communautaires et il voulait dire que en fait il s'excuse de pas bien parler français, mais qu'il adore en fait les radios françaises. Voilà.
J'ai compris qu'il était content aussi de parler sur une radio française et d'être venu jusqu'à nous. Ça c'est très très cool. Est-ce qu'on peut savoir quelle est l'implantation et les résultats des radios locales, les radios communautaires en Angleterre, peut-être auprès de Will? Est-ce qu'il y a une grosse implantation, beaucoup de radios communautaires ou pas en Angleterre? A lot of communitary radios in England or not? Yes? You are many?
Yes, in terms of licensed radio in the UK, there's currently 240 community radio licenses. There's approximately 300 commercial licenses and there's 39 local BBC radio stations. So community radio is very much gathering momentum at the moment and increasing its stake in the marketplace. 10 years ago, there was only BBC and commercial radio networks in terms of the licensed landscape. Now it's a 3-person game with community coming into it.
Alors il dit qu'avant les radios FM occupaient beaucoup de place, mais qu'aujourd'hui il y a 240 radios communautaires qui sont implantées et qui marchent bien.
Ouais, et puis j'ai entendu aussi pas mal de stations de la BBC aussi. La ça. BBC, je pense que tout le monde connaît. Qu'est-ce qui fait la force d'une radio communautaire? Communitary radio station can be strong to make a good audience.
How can community radio be strong? I think the point of community radio is very much to provide a local focus to broadcasting. So when commercial radio started in the UK, the idea was that it would be independent from the BBC, and it would provide locally focused broadcasting independent of the BBC. But those days are a long time ago. Commercial radio, which has a huge part of the marketplace, and is a brilliant part of one of the reasons why UK radio is in a good place at the moment. But generally speaking, it has become more homogenized. It is the same. You're listening in Dover when you get off the ferry from Calais, and up to Carlisle, just on the border of Scotland. You're listening to more or less the same kind of radio. Community radio is about the local focus, and it's volunteer orientated. So this is people in a community giving themselves a voice. And as part of that process, they also empower themselves with skills, and that helps their life opportunities and their employability as well.
En fait, dans les radios communautaires, ce qui est important, c'est pas forcément les pubs, c'est ce que les animateurs disent. C'est surtout l'animateur qui est important et pas les pubs.
D'accord, ouais, j'ai compris qu'il parlait aussi un petit peu des différents types de radios qu'on trouvait, et que c'était un peu toujours la même musique et le même type de format qu'on trouvait un peu partout en Angleterre, et que la force d'une radio locale, c'était vraiment d'avoir un programme particulier, comme tu le dis, notamment grâce aux animateurs. Will Jackson, qui lui gère Radio Independence Groups, vous avez beaucoup de radios dont vous vous occupez, vous faites également beaucoup de panels, et vous étudiez, je crois, notamment quel type de personnes écoutent les radios communautaires. A lot of communitary radios are working with you? Yes? Yes?
So my members are independent production companies that produce content for the BBC, for commercial radio. I don't think we're actually producing anything on community radio yet, but it's certainly somewhere that we would like to work with. It's important that our members are based all around the UK and can add to the voices being heard on the radio, on BBC commercial radio, and hopefully on community radio.
Ils sont indépendants et ils travaillent beaucoup avec la BBC. Et en fait, ils sont placés à différents endroits de l'Angleterre pour vendre des programmes à des radios comme la BBC par exemple.
Je crois que Radio Independent Group, dont s'occupe Will Jackson, a également, comme on va le faire ici lors du Salon de la radio 2017, des prix pour récompenser les meilleures radios locales, et qu'il y a une vraie émulsion qui se passe au niveau des radios locales grâce à Radio Independence Group. C'est peut-être un peu compliqué à traduire, déjà que les mots en français sont compliqués. You are working with a lot of radio stations, but you are also producing some awards for the radio stations each year. Yes, like we're gonna do here on the Salon de la radio, je ne sais même pas comment on dit en anglais d'ailleurs. Mais it's important to do this sort of thing.
So we're making specific programs for the BBC and for commercial radio, for all of the different networks, everything from music to documentaries, and we're making a wide range of programs, and that's growing and increasing. One of the things we've talked about earlier is the BBC will be opening up its programs to competition between in-house and independent producers, which we see as a big opportunity to grow the sector in the UK.
Alors, il dit qu'il vend des programmes à la BBC et que du coup, j'ai pas trop compris. J'ai pas trop comment traduire ça.
Moi j'ai compris que c'était important d'avoir une vraie émulsion justement en termes de radio locale et de rassembler un petit peu tout le monde. Je crois qu'on va passer à la conférence dans un instant, c'est ça?
Je traduis.
Quelqu'un vient à notre secours.
La BBC ouvre ses programmes pour faire un appel à la concurrence qui fait que des producteurs privés indépendants vont pouvoir postuler pour proposer des programmes à la BBC.
Le marché anglais est vraiment un marché spécifique, on est d'accord.
C'est très spécifique.
Ouais, ben justement, on va en parler. On est ici au Salon de la Radio, venez nous rejoindre. Vous nous écoutez, vous nous regardez sur salondelaradio.com. Encore merci à Towercast qui nous aide à diffuser la RNT à Paris. Et puis bien sûr avec nous, Broadcast-associés, Vizion'R, Multicam, Maxi, RCS, Safe Diffusion, sans qui rien ne serait possible. Donc on voulait remercier Dom Chambers de Somerville FM. Thank you very much to come here in France. Et puis merci à Will Jackson de Radio Independence Group qu'on va donc retrouver là dans un tout petit instant pour la conférence en direct sur la radio du Salon de la Radio. Tout de suite. Le jingle doit partir normalement. C'est là qu'on voit que c'est du direct. Donc faut meubler, c'est ça? On me fait signe? Oui, bah, on va meubler, il n'y a aucun souci. Alors je voulais vous dire que cette année, on a un petit peu changé la donne. On a voulu, avec cette radio filmée du Salon de la Radio, vous faire vivre, comme je vous le disais, en direct tous les temps forts du salon, en vous diffusant les meilleurs moments. Alors que l'année dernière, on faisait essentiellement du off. Et c'est ce qu'on va voir tout de suite avec donc cette conférence. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. À tout à l'heure. Et tout de suite la conférence.
So this was the radio of the Salon de la Radio in French and in English. And we are going to start the real conference. So as you may have understood, so it's going to be in English. If you are not that comfortable with English, we are going to pick up some questions potentially in French and we'll be able to translate later as well. So, as you can see, we have Dom Chambers, that is the director of Summer Valley FM, which is a community radio, and we have Will Jackson, that is working for Radio Independent Groups, which is a group of local content producers in the UK. So, as we have just seen, with mainly for the BBC and commercial radios. So this morning we had the opening conference where we have seen an overview of the UK landscape with first the BBC for the public stations, then the commercial radios, and we wanted to have a specific focus about community stations, but also about local producers that are working with all type of radios. So I'm gonna let Dom to start. Do you want to start with your presentation, or you want to start with your audio?
Consortium, why not? I think presentation is going to be too grand a word for it, but I do have a graphic which we can enjoy as part of my spiel. Has that gone up somewhere? There it is. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Let's get our session underway. Genuinely pleasurable experience there, speaking on the French radio, which I didn't think would be something to be achieved today. So that's absolutely fantastic. Really great being here. And I love the fact that this conference, the European Radio Show, is so interested in community radio. And it's been wonderful to have had your response so far today.
Yeah, actually, just a word from the director of the Salon that mentioned yesterday that this event started initially with the community radios in France, so it's important to know that it started with the smallest station in France, and it's a way it grew, and it became, and now it's reflecting the entire set of radios. So it's a very important point, and that's why we pay a lot of attention about community radios at the radio show.
I think in this country there's been this long and honourable history of community radio, and perhaps on a conference future European radio show we could have a panel of various countries represented, and we can compare and contrast and share best practice as to what's going on in other parts of the European continent as well. So I don't want to repeat what I've already established this morning about community radio, but I think actually, Will, we might just start by saying that we work together. So on the one hand, the Radio Independence Group is a very different area to the community radio sector. However, we do work together, and we work together on a group called the Radio Academy affiliate members. The Radio Academy is the central charity for the radio industry in the UK, and we're called affiliate because we don't pay them a lot of money. I think is probably what it is all about. So you're obviously representing independent producers, and I'm representing community media or radio, but also on that group we have the other radio sectors, which is hospital radio. Do you have hospital radio in France?
No, we have school radios.
Yes.
But hospital radios, we have very few.
Okay. Well, so in the UK, the radio sectors are hospital, student radio, we've talked about it a little bit, and community, and what else is? Oh, prison radio is a big phenomenon in the UK as well. Prison radio is like a microcosm of the community radio sector. It really is about empowering people with skills as they're rehabilitating themselves and preparing themselves to be outside of prison. With community radio, I think there's a number of challenges because we're as I was saying earlier, the new kids on the block. And we have a number of challenges as our sector expands and it takes on more and more stations, more and more volunteers, and hopefully building more and more listeners as well. Now, this is a piece of work I've done, this graphic here, which identifies the various needs in the community radio sector. And although we talk about community radio, really a lot of what I talk about is community media because there are so many different platforms for delivery these days. But I like the word radio. It reminds me of the times I used to listen to Radio Luxembourg in my bed in the 1970s. And so here we have 5 areas that I believe are really important for the community media stroke radio sector as it grows and develops. We need to have organisations and people that advocate for us. And you've been good enough to let us do a little bit of that today, to promote community radio and to promote its place in the landscape, which has been exclusively occupied by bigger and more established players, really. I don't see this as a rivalry thing, and I mentioned that earlier, but we do need to be advocated for. And closely to that, we also need to be represented. We have in the UK the Community Media Association, which is the officially recognised representational body, and I chaired that organisation, and I bring the very good wishes to this conference of the current chair of the Community Media Association, who is Lucinda Guy. So they are the chief representative organisation. You'll see on my graphic here that I have put Community Media Association there as one of the deliverers. So the brown are the needs and the red and yellow are people who are delivering these services that we need. Clearly, communication. Communication seems such an obvious point, doesn't it? But actually, as a radio industry and as a sector within that industry, I don't think we're particularly good at communicating with each other, sharing best practice. I know of community radio stations that are worried about paying their electricity bill. And there's a community station down the road. They're worrying about paying their electricity bill as well. But they're not talking to each other. One lot gets a complaint registered with the regulator at Ofcom, and then another lot, similar activity goes on, and they're not talking to each other. So communication really needs to come into play a little bit more. Revenue. We are the only sector in the UK that does not have a cohesive strategy when it comes to funding. Commercial radio speaks for itself. I mean, you're either going to make the money and work as a business or you're not. And if you're not, then someone else will come along and do it better. The BBC is funded through the licence fee, which may seem a little strange perhaps in France, I don't know.
In France, you have a tax on commercial radios. So there is 1 or 2% of the revenues of any commercial radios that are stored in a fund that is funding the community radios.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a long way to go in the UK on this, but I think the budget for the last year, my friend from the BBC is no longer here, was 122.5 million pounds of public money, and that was servicing 39 local radio stations. Now, I'm a huge fan of the BBC, but I will, of course, feel obliged to mention that the government funding to the 245 community stations currently stands at £400,000. So there's quite a differential. Revenue is something that needs to be thought about. And I think one of the reasons why some of our community stations are struggling is not so much the lack of money, but a lack of ability to know how to get hold of it, and indeed, you know, what you do when you do get hold of it. I think there's a shortfall of skills in the community radio sector. Those are skills about how to administer and run a charitable organisation, how to find funding, as well as broadcasting skills. I freely accept that not everybody in our sector wants to be a BBC Standard, for instance, broadcast journalist. However, I think that there is still a shortfall of skills and a need to know about the law and what you can and can't do in broadcasting. These are areas that I think would improve the sustainability of our sector. So we've got the 5 areas there. There's possibly a 6th area, but otherwise it just gets too complicated. And my limited capacity to design was thwarted by the fact I think we need to measure outcomes as well, and we need to have a better methodology for that. There's a lot of talk at the moment about how community radio measures its audience, because there is no set way of doing that within the sector at the moment. Oh, thank you. Very good. So that's the community radio sector broken down. I think we are both succeeding and expanding as a sector, but at the same time, to some extent, failing. I think the word fail is a big, possibly too strong a word. 10%, around 10% of community radio stations have gone out of business since we launched around about 10 years ago. And that actually is not too bad at all. But my view is that we could be, as a sector, performing to a much higher level of impact, and impact on the volunteers that we train, but also the impact on audiences. And I think we're still at the very early stage. When I talked earlier about empowering people with a voice, I have a tendency to... Is that me making... Is it when I do that? Anyway, that is...
It's not me.
Oh, I've lost my thread there for a second. But I think where we're going to be developing more is in the areas that the voices that you're not hearing on commercial radio. And let's face it, commercial radio is pretty well about the music and who's delivering that music. And the BBC, which is can be locally orientated. The BBC is a fantastic world brand. There's no question about it. But I think we will hear more from people who will find wider platforms and bigger audiences, those voices that are less heard. And it's not just the voices of individuals, although that's important. It's the voices of marginalised sections of society and marginalised communities as well. So I think I'm going to hand over to Will to tell us a little bit about independent producers. And before our business here is done, I would like to pay you a radio feature about the impact of training and what it means to individuals and groups. But in the meantime, here's Will.
You want to play it now or after, before or after Will?
Let's have him for a little while.
All right. So Will, you are working for radio independent groups that is in charge of, that is basically gathering local producers for audio contents for the radio.
Yes.
Yeah. And you have a presentation actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, as far as I'm aware, does not exist in France, by the way.
Hello, I'm Will Jackson. I'm the Managing Director of the Radio Independence Group. Let's click that.
Might not be plugged. Let's do that.
Or I can click on. There we go. Thank you. That's fine. So a little bit of the history of the independent radio production sector in the UK. We started making programs for commercial radio in the UK in the late 80s. And the first main production for the BBC started with a fund of around £500,000 from the then head of radio, David Hatch, in the early 90s, which makes the sector around 25 years old now. As well as working with the BBC, which is now our primary business, we produce around 20% of the BBC's output. We do also work with the national commercial radio sector, Classic FM, Absolute, Magic, and have diversified as the audio sector's changed to produce branded audio content, things like audio guides for museums and podcasts and so on. And that's one of the things we'll talk about later. We've just done a census of our sector, and we think the value of the sector in the UK is nearly €50 million and growing all the time. So to give you an idea of the sort of content our members produce, I'm not expecting you to specifically to be able to read that, but that's a list of the independently produced programs that are being broadcast on the major radio networks just today. A range of members have made these programs, and I thought we'd have a look just to give you an idea of the sector. So we start, if you were listening at around 4 AM this morning, to BBC Radio 1 Extra, which is the dance music station, you'd be listening to Diplo and Friends, program made by one of our members, TBI Media. You move on to 6 Music and The Breakfast Show on that, again, an alternative music network made by one of our largest independent companies, Wise Buddha, interviewing Ewan McGregor there. He's got the movie out, T2 Trainspotting. And by way of complete contrast, on BBC Radio 3, the Sunday morning show with Jonathan Swain, made by Unique, the production company, looking at the work of Sibelius. We also work with World Service. So this is a program called Heart and Soul. It's produced by the Reduced Listening Company, looking at religious beliefs and spirituality around the world. And then at 3 on Radio 4, an absolute classic, Gardener's Question Time, something probably uniquely British. The show started on the home service of the BBC in 1947. Something Else took over its production in 2009, and Gardener's Question Time does exactly what it says on the tin. It travels around the UK to village halls and venues around the UK with a panel of gardening experts, and listeners come along and ask them questions. And that's now an independent production and one of the jewels in the BBC's crown. A slight cheat next. Jamie Cullum does a syndicated show made by a production company called Folded Wing. It goes on BBC Radio 2, but it's also syndicated around the world. So this is something that is made that the UK exports, the amazing Jamie Cullum and his love of jazz. And tonight's broadcast, if you're in Taiwan, it's going out on ICRT FM 100 in Taiwan, but is also heard on BBC Radio 2. Speech programme as well, made by Wire Free Productions. This is Jane Garvey and Peter Allen, a much-loved duo on the BBC 5 Live News and Sports Network. And again, by contrast, the next show, going out 9 PM Eastern Time on in the States, is John Delbeck's Mutants Radio, which goes out on the iHeart Radio Evolution station that's heard on HD2 and FM translators across the United States, playing dance and EDM. That's made by a company called We Are Grape, again, a bright young company doing amazing things in radio. And then last but not least, on BBC local stations. This goes out on a network of local stations in Gloucestershire, Wiltshire, Bristol and Somerset, and is made by Ping Productions. Graham Pars's show, playing old-time music, crooners and big band. So that shows the range of programming content that we make for the BBC and other broadcasters around the world. But as well as pure audio content for radio stations, in our survey, we found all the other things that our members are doing as well. So this is things like the increasing importance of podcasts. And if you're in the session looking at millennials, you'll see that people are accessing radio in different ways, and podcasts are becoming increasingly important. Our members also do a lot of training work, which I know Dom is very passionate about, and rightly so. It's important that both to support the independent sector and the wider radio community, that people have a really good grip of what you might call craft skills, the craftsmanship of making great radio programming. As a sideline, if they've got studios in their building, a lot of our members get income from hiring studios out, so if you are ever anywhere in the UK and you need to hire a studio, we can probably do you a good deal. There may be also live productions, we'll talk a little bit about that later on, and jingles and audio branding. So Wise Buddha, who we mentioned producing content earlier, also make jingles. They have the Imager custom imaging service and the No Sheet Music production library. So I thought it would be also worth just mentioning that indies are spread all across the UK. We think it's really important that our members are rooted in their community, and rather than being in one central location like the BBC and Broadcasting House, it's important that these give a range and diversity of viewpoints from around the UK, as you can see on the dots on the map there. So what does an indie actually do? I thought we'd take a quick look at TBI Media, who are a big award-winning company who say that compelling content is at the heart of everything they do, and it certainly served them well. They won Production Company of the Year at the 2016 New York Festival Radio Awards, and also won another 6 golds and the Grand Awards. So they're a well-recognized company. They do big events as well as making great radio content. And again, around the world, they're just putting on a production of the music of Queen, a rock and symphonic spectacular that's playing right now in Sydney and Melbourne. And I've blagged their showreel for you, so we'll have a quick look at what they've been producing recently.
Can you put the sound up, please? Vous pouvez monter le son, s'il vous plaît? Le son?
BBC Radio.
It's showtime. It's Saturday night. It's 1 a.m.
Now, Diplo and Friends on 1 Extra and BBC Radio 1. This is B-Trade, BBC Radio 1.
BBC Radio 1. BBC Radio 1. On two of those, Craig Charles, the man, the myth, the legend, not so tall, not so dark, not so handsome man.
David Bowie is many different things to many different people.
Bowie with Tim Minchin.
This is a story that will give every struggling band real hope.
This is the story of a man regarded by many as the greatest rock drummer of all time. I'm Dave Grohl with the John Bonham Story.
Summer of Live. Blur on Absolute Radio.
Second-class passenger Esther Hart sits bolt upright in bed. She's awake and dressed.
Band leader Wallace Hartley's body will be found. In Hartley's pockets, his tips from the night before.
We have 21 musicians who, as you can hear, will be providing a live music soundtrack to the events as they unfold.
In 26 minutes' time, President John F. Kennedy will pass by that open window, and with 3 shots, the course of history will be changed.
In 1987, a film came out based on my experiences as a disc jockey in Vietnam.
The King's Speech tells the story of how King George VI struggled to deliver the most important broadcast of his life.
It tackled the universal and timeless themes of prejudice, innocence, and courage. I think about my audience. I think about the over 1 million, they tell me, people who are starting their day or ending their day. And I want to give them something hopeful. I want to give them something inspirational.
We'll be live from Britain's last remaining fizzy drinks factory as it closes its doors for the final time.
We've got an exclusive chat with the woman who was rebuilt by doctors following a horrific jetpack accident.
Welcome to the 5th chapter of the manuscript, sponsored by Just for Men and recorded at Under the Bridge.
So we've done a 1980s power ballad for you. A swan song, if you like.
This is your swan song, hero of the modern game.
On Tuesday, the 8th of May, 1945, Winston Churchill sat in the Cabinet Office in Downing Street, ready to speak to the nation.
Never in the field of human conflict was so much oak by so many to so few.
So that's a selection of the projects made by just one independent production company, TBI Media, for a range of BBC and commercial radio clients. And actually, if you're in the first session this morning with the UK radio panel, the launch of Virgin Radio, which you saw Richard Branson on the Virgin train, that was also a TBI production. It's a bit too new to be on that show reel, but was an incredible thing, producing a 3 or 4 hour live radio show from a moving train. And if we struggle to get the audio from here, imagine putting that on a moving train going through the countryside from Manchester to London. If you can click it on one. Oh, there's more. There we go. So I wanted to mention one other programme specifically, which is a programme made by Folded Wing for the British Council, called The Selector Radio, taking new British music to over 40 countries, promoting the sounds, talents and musical culture of modern Britain to an international audience. And this is made in 2 ways. One, it's available as a programme for broadcast, and the slide there is from Radio Exxon, a FM station in Istanbul, but it's also available as a kit part programme, so you can take your own presenters and include the content. So that's taking Britain to the world. And I think as radio is changing and audio is changing, we face the same challenges as have already been identified in several other of the sessions about non-linear radio, a wide mix of media consumption, personalisation, and our members are adapting for these. But however audio is consumed, I think the crucial elements will remain, which is one-to-one communication. So it's not all of you out there, you're talking directly to you, the one listener. It's around telling great stories that move people in some way, the compelling content, the must-listens, finding those stories in your communities and telling them in a beautiful way, and increasing the range and diversity of voice, so making sure that the whole of the UK, the whole of your country is covered and is able to be heard on the radio. And we're working with new platforms all the time. So companies like Audible, part of Amazon, our members are making content for them, for Acast and for Panoply, so are trying to find new ways of monetizing audio content and getting it out to the audience in whatever form they want to listen in. And our role as the Radio Independence Group is to be the trade body for around 100 producers across the UK, and that involves negotiating contracts with the BBC, working on training, which Dom's already talked about via our Rig Train scheme, and producing the Audio Production Awards, which celebrate the industry. Because I think one thing we're quite bad at doing is all getting together, celebrating with one voice the sector, telling people how great audio production is. And in the last year, we've opened up a lot of BBC radio schedules to more competition between their existing in-house producers and independent production companies. We're working on levelling the playing field between the two parts of the sector. there's potentially a new public service broadcasting content fund that could be worth €70 million over 3 years. That was earmarked for children's television production. We want to make sure that radio and audio has a fair share of that, and working with new platforms and new partners both in the UK, here in Europe and around the world. And that's me. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to take them now, or my contact details are there. Thank you very much for listening.
Many thanks, Will. Maybe I will start with my questions before we, or you want to add something, Dom?
I don't know if we've got time. I did have a little bit of audio to play.
We do have a bit of time before the Q&A.
Yeah, so this is, I went out over the summer in August last year to find out who else was training in community media and why they were training. And I only came back with a handful of stories, but I think they're quite compelling. And what you hear in this, I think you have to multiply up, scale up as to what is happening with thousands, if not millions of people in the UK.
Can you put the volume up? Pouvez monter le volume, s'il vous plaît? Well, we have a little issue with the sound. What are going to? Can someone help with the sound, please? Can you help with the PC or with the computer, please?
I don't know. Do you think we'll resolve this?
Or? Well, I'm not sure. Well, we're gonna. If someone can help to get the sound working, it will be appreciated. Thank you. Si quelqu'un pouvait aider pour que le son marche sur le PC, ce serait super. Merci. So we're going to start a bit the questions, and if we can come back to the sound, we will. Right. I had a question, Will, with the local producers. That is something that is maybe not that developed in France. You have some radio shows in France where, yeah, it's apparently the output that is not. Merci. So. Something that so we have a few local producers or companies that are proposing programs to the radios, but there are more people that used to work in the radio before. I was wondering if in the UK and the producers of RIG, are they people that used to work in radio before, or are they kind of newcomers, new people that are proposing something different to the radio stations, or both?
It's a mixture. So many of our members are, in particular, ex-BBC and have got as far as they're going to get with the corporation and want to get outside the sometimes restrictive world of the BBC and have creative ideas and want to do more. So you've seen the various different things that independent producers can do. So it's not just making one program for one network, it's a whole range of programs. But equally, there are people that have just maybe come out and got the audio bug and thought, this is something I can do. And then or have just a great idea for a program or a burning need to make some audio content. So it's a real mixture. And some people will just work with the BBC and make one or two beautifully crafted programs a year for one network. Other companies work with all the BBC networks, commercial radio companies, so they may make podcasts. Our members make podcasts for Yamaha, The Economist, all sorts of amazing brands. But yeah, there isn't really a set route into becoming an independent producer.
Okay, a question more for Dom. So you said at RIG you are not working much with the community radio as of now, something maybe that's going to be developed. But I was wondering, regarding the community stations, is there any sharing of programs between radio stations like it happens in France, where basically the local stations, they share programs that they do? So for example, a radio in Marseille is sharing its program to other community stations, so they can share good quality programs across. It's not really networking because it's not broadcast at the same time, but it's enabling to be able to put a little bit more of investment in terms of persons to do high quality programs that they could share to a wider audience for other radios. Do you do that in the UK within the community stations?
It is a growing phenomenon in the UK. I mentioned earlier that we're really quite a young network at the moment, and actually one of the things in the future I think will be for community radio to get itself together as a production company, and that might be of interest to the BBC and the wider radio industry, and I'm sure there will be developments. Perhaps you and I could even talk about that at some point. I think it's important to emphasize that community radio is principally about a locality empowering itself with a voice. So therefore, its first duty, if you like, is to generate programs in its locality. However, once that is done, a community broadcaster might take in some other programs doing the rounds to help it generate an audience, or because the content material will be of interest to the local listeners. At the radio station I run, I more or less have a principle of not taking any content that isn't generated locally, but then I'm lucky because we have such great volunteer input that we're generating 80 fresh hours of programming per week, so we don't really need any others. That's not to say that there aren't other community broadcasters where volunteers are less on the ground and they can take in one or two programs. So I think it is happening, and there's some clever people out there, and some of whom have been here today actually, who are doing precisely that, are increasing their listenership through the community sector by making audio that is appropriate to a community radio audience.
Good. So I think that the sound is ready, right? So let's go for it. We don't need the video, it's purely sound, I think, yeah?
I'm Jamie with your latest headlines. Coming up, the family of a truant boy campaigned for funding for an operation, a new scanner unveiled at the...
That was Jamie reading the local news as part of his traineeship at Summer Valley FM, which we deliver with our educational partners at Bath College. Jamie is a 21-year-old on the autistic spectrum with Asperger's syndrome. He is bright, but when he came to us, it was on the back of 2 years on benefits with little employment experience and certainly nothing fulfilling. He was, as he now reflects, effectively unemployable, and he was living as a dependent. Progress, however, was steady, and a few months in, he was off to a job interview. We'll pick up with Jamie a little bit later, but he is one of hundreds of people that have made themselves employable at Summer Valley FM through radio training and the development of transferable skills. What we do, though, is not unique. Far from it. During August 2016, I went travelling around the UK to see how other community broadcasters were improving the employability and life chances of their volunteers through radio training. Matthew is a visually impaired presenter at Sunny Govan in Glasgow.
So for me, I'm really into DJing, I'm really into putting music together, I'm really interested in showcasing my talent, and for so many people, everyone has, a story to tell when they come here. That is the key of what Sunny Govan and really so many other community stations are about. It's about the people and what they want to achieve in their career and their aspirations and goals.
And I'll be back to one of Britain's beacons of community broadcasting in a tick. But over at Siren FM in Lincoln, I follow an important line of thought with their manager, Andrew David, who not only runs the community station but also works for the university and, incidentally, is a one-time chair of the Community Media Association. What I was keen to find out is Andrew and his team training students and volunteers for the professional broadcast networks? Or is their training more about a wider set of skills that make people more employable, whatever their career choice?
It's the latter. It always has to be, because there are not enough broadcast jobs for all the journalists and all the media production students who are turned out by universities across the United Kingdom. However, if you can give them skills where they become more employable, because one of the things that broadcasting does is it increases your confidence. Community radio gives a wonderful platform to give confidence to people who may, in the education system, have been told they're not worth anything and have been remaindered. And I've seen legion examples, not just here, but across the whole of the network, when I was chair of the CMA, of places where they just stolidly carry on with people who most people would have given up with.
At Erewash Sound in the East Midlands, they traditionally see their role as empowering their area with a clear identity that separates them from the two well-known neighbouring cities. But as Jeff Martin tells me, they are now expanding their training. And one of their motives for doing this is personal to Jeff.
When I first set up Erewash Sound, it was all about providing a community station for the community of Erewash, and it's still there today. But the thing that I get the most buzz out of all now is taking somebody who comes in here, doesn't matter how old they are, who've never done radio before, they've just got a keen interest in their community, a keen interest in communicating, and put them through our training programme. And, you know, I'm as proud as punch every time somebody makes their debut on air. Whether they go on to have a career in radio or whether that just helps them be happier in their life, then to me that makes it all worthwhile.
Sunny Govan have an impressive range of projects that really help the people of Govan deal with acute issues of poverty and homelessness. But sticking with our theme today, I asked their training manager about their employability work.
We use radio as the hook. You know, lots of young people don't want to go on an employability course. It's not that exciting for them. But they might be music and radio orientated, and coming to Sunny Govan, they can fulfil their ambitions to get involved in radio. They can also learn core life skills that will help them to not just get a job, but sustain employment, which is crucial in this day and age as well.
Do you know roughly how many people that you're training per year who are going on to get fulfilling jobs?
I would say annually about 120 people. For young people, we would say about 50 young people.
Steve Englefoyle there. And like Jeff, the passion of trainers is key to how we use community media to improve people's life chances. But on this particular afternoon I was at Sunny Govan, the evidence of what they achieve was all around in their busy and thriving offices and studio.
My name's Amanda. Basically I'm an apprentice for business and administration, so I'll get assessed and things while I work here.
What does Sunny Govan mean to you?
Well, they're helping me further my education, which is good, and they're giving me opportunities no one else would have given me, which is awesome.
Hello, I'm Mariana Dimitriou. I just completed my HNC and HND in radio production at City of Glasgow College, and I am here at Sunny Govan to volunteer and gain experience for future employment. Sunny Govan has a massive listenership, and it's well known in Scotland anyway, and it means a lot to me that I am working here, just due to the opportunity that it brings to me and the fact that they have faith in me having a show live.
Where do you hope to be in, say, 5 years' time?
In 5 years' time, I hope to be employed.
Employed and doing something you want to do.
That's it, really.
That'll do. All over the country, community radio is empowering people with voices and skills that improve lives. It goes to the heart of what we do. We must nurture and grow this. We must also shout about it and open ears. Those ears need to include government, because community radio is saving the taxpayer millions of pounds by helping people off benefits and into being contributing taxpayers.
And we will make Britain a country that works not for a privileged few, but for every one of us.
But what about Jamie? Well, he left us a few weeks ago to take up a position as a data manager with a social housing group. He is now living independently.
I think I've changed a lot over the last 6 months. My social confidence and self-esteem have gone up a lot, and I'm able to interact with people far more naturally than I used to. Although most importantly, I'd say that I started with no prospects for a decent job at all. It was really difficult for me to find any kind of employment, and what employment I could find was far below what I felt I was capable of, and it wasn't fulfilling. Yet now I've just secured a job with a well-respected local firm, and I'll be working for them full-time from now on.
Before he left, I asked him to write his own case study that we could use to encourage others to benefit from the same opportunity. Now, if I sat down for a whole day in front of a blank sheet of paper and summoned all my literary skills such as they exist, and any passing muse that might happen to be fluttering by, I could never have come up with a better line when he wrote, "After completing my traineeship at Summer Valley FM, I am no longer the Jamie defined by my Asperger's, but the Jamie defined by my aspirations."
That's the latest. I'm Jamie.
Wow. Yep. What a report. Did you make it especially for this event?
I'd love to say yes, but the answer is no. I had made that with the event of the National Community Media Conference in the UK. But you know what? When I was making that, I sort of had one listener in mind as well, and that is the recently appointed Minister of Skills in the UK. He has heard it, and we're meeting in April to discuss it further.
Good. Yep. Will?
One, I was going to say, that's a really impressive piece of audio. You've got some brilliant testimonies on there. I worked for a similar organisation for the Prison Radio Association for 6 months in Brixton Prison, an 1820s Victorian prison in South London. And part of that is getting people back to work, is giving them new skills. And the thing that I hadn't really thought through until I actually worked there and with these people, giving them new skills, is you think you're training them to be radio DJs, and maybe you are, but what they're getting from that is things like reading skills, speaking skills, computer skills, because these people may not have had a computer at home, confidence. And one thing I hadn't thought about was listening skills. And when you're editing audio, you have to listen. And some of the people that we were working with lived in chaotic households or were in gangs where it was important to shout loudest to make your voice heard. And sometimes, we know this as radio practitioners, interviewing is as much about listening and learning to listen and respond in a way. And it's teaching them social skills as well as everything else. It's not just about becoming a DJ.
In terms of creativity, do you think that compared to a few years back, people are still using radio, doing radio for answering their need for creativity, or now it's more turning to YouTube, so the YouTubers, and is it the same kind of need, or is there a competition between medias?
I think there's always going to be a need for audio, entertainment and information, but we of course, and for many years now, have lived in a multimedia platforms of delivery. I don't see it as competition, but I just see it is about generating an audience, however you, whatever medium you get to that audience. There's plenty of entertainment and information that needs to get out there.
The thing I see when I work with Student Radio Association, which is the UK has a really strong student radio network, the thing that I'm buoyed by is that young people are as excited about creating audio, possibly more so than when I was starting in the industry. And when I was starting in the industry, you were working on reel-to-reel tapes that you had to go to somewhere special, a radio studio, a professional radio studio to play with. Now you can create incredible audio on your phone that you will have at home. And so the opportunity to make great audio, the barriers to entry have come right down. And I think the kids are more excited in producing more creative and exciting content than they were 20, 30 years ago.
So if I understand correctly, there is no crisis of volunteers as far as community radios are concerned, because in France, for example, you can hear some radios saying, well, it's so difficult to do community radios nowadays because we are really struggling to find volunteers to do the programs.
I'm sure that can be an issue, but to my mind, it's about the culture that you set in your radio station. I said earlier, and I hope that I'm not unique in this, I'm sure I'm not, but I've never said no to any volunteer or any person in our community who wants to come in and talk about how they volunteer. And it's not all about voices on a microphone. We once had an event and we had a ladies' local choir singing at the event because that's the only way I could get the hall to keep them there. And afterwards she rang me up and she said, I thought you were such a nice bunch of people, I'd like to come in and volunteer. So I said, well, do come into my office, and we sat down. And she said, but the only thing is I've got a terrible confession to make, I'm not interested in radio. Well, you could have heard a pin drop for a second. But then her eyes fell upon my desk. The colour of which, the beige, was a distant memory as it disappeared beneath a sea of papers and CDs and all the paraphernalia that sits on my desk. That was 6 years ago. Every Thursday afternoon for 2 hours, she comes in and she clears my desk. We have huge fun. She also works with Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, so we get all our tax things done as well. So there's all sorts of ways of volunteering to make this community organisation happen, and being a voice on the radio is only one of those things. I would never blame an organisation that couldn't attract enough volunteers, but I would positively assert that it's the culture that will attract volunteers in. And actually, love of radio is pretty well at the core of that.
One last question before we ask the public for their questions. Do you have any contact in your city where you run Summer Valley FM with the local commercial radios? Do you meet? Do you collaborate? How does it work?
Well, actually, Will and I were talking earlier about the Radio Academy, which is the central charity for the radio industry in the United Kingdom. And that provides a good platform for us all to meet. And we have panels like the one that we've had here today with the different radio sections, BBC, commercial, community, student, hospital, etc. And they're meeting. And that's a great example, I think, of sharing best practice. If you're talking about collaboration from a business point of view, I think that's a little bit less on the ground, but I would never say never, and I would never not want to explore the possibilities that even our networks could work for commercial benefit. But I don't think there's many people saying that right now.
Okay, thank you. So a few people have joined, so Dom Chambers is representing the community stations. So Dom Chambers represente les radios associatives en Angleterre. And Will Jackson is representing the local producers in the UK, les producteurs indépendants de contenu audio. So once the first range has finished with the selfies, we are going to start the Q&As, right? We are going to start the Q&A. So does anyone have a question, please? Question? Yeah, one question here.
Merci bien. It's great to hear about what the radio independents are doing with the BBC. Great to hear that and to see on screen some of that. But actually, you're going to have to pass it back now, because I'm going to ask a question to Dom about community radio and about commercial radio. And for years in the UK, the community radio kept on saying, commercial radio kept on saying, we want a level playing field against the BBC. And this idea of the level playing field, un équilibre entre les deux secteurs, was the theme that kept coming out of commercial radio. Now, in community radio, you are regulated up to the hilt. You can only put your aerial so high. You can only have so much power to your transmitter. You can't make a profit. There are limits on how you can make money. And you have this social gain imperative. You can only exist if you can show the regulator that you doing radio has some kind of social gain for the community. Commercial radio doesn't need to have any social gain. they broadcast in an area, they make money in an area, and the fact they don't have to do anything in particular for the community except maybe entertain them and inform them on the radio is probably one of the reasons why they're retreating more and more to places like Leicester Square. So you're not exactly the representative today of the UK community radio industry, but what's your own feeling about this? Do you think that community radio should be demanding now more of a level playing field with commercial radio?
Well, funny enough, I was the chair of the Community Media Association when we were negotiating with friend Ian O'Neill, who was on this platform earlier from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport and Government. My personal view is of a deregulatory ethos. There are others in our sector that quite like some of those barriers because we need to be protected from the advance maybe of commercial operators. We did negotiate a much better deal in terms of revenue possibilities than we had previously. And I think if you look at the history of radio in the UK, I think there's a certain kind of deregulatory ethos irrespective of who the government is. And I think commercial radio was presumably quite heavily regulated, and it's sort of got less and less as time goes by. I did an interview with Ed Vasey, who then was the Minister at Department of Culture, Media and Sport, on the day that the Community Radio Amendment Order was announced in January 2015, exactly 2 years ago actually. And I put that precise question to him and said, why does the commercial radio industry need any protection at all? And I got a sort of a combination of a smile and a splutter. And he said, I can entirely understand why you would want to ask that question, and proceeded not to answer it. But I think you know, obviously the radio centre is a very powerful lobby. My personal approach, whether I was chairing the CMA or indeed any of the other national platforms that I work on, and I'm very keen that we do evolve a more strategic approach to community radio in the UK, is collaboration. It is much better, in my view, to get on with people, to recognise that we all have a place in the pantheon of the radio landscape, and to see the strengths in each other. And in fact, I think the Radio Centre's been quite good to us in some ways. So this is not a story that has by any means come to its conclusion, but my personal view is that the commercial radio industry does not need protecting from us.
Any other question? Des questions? Is it a question or? There is a question in the back.
Is there some radio who play French singer, French music? Sometimes.
So your question is about the quota, right? No.
Non, pas vraiment. Je vais dire en français, ça sera plus simple. Est-ce qu'il y a des radios qui, en Angleterre, passent de la musique française?
Ah, okay. Are the radios in the UK playing French songs?
Yes.
Which one?
Can you develop?
We don't, and I understand it may be different in France. I'm not quite sure where French legislation is about the quota of French-generated music being played on the radio, but I remember coming in here in 1990, it's a long time ago, and there was a lot of talk about the quite high quota.
40%.
40% was it, yeah. We've never had legislation like that in the UK, and I'm not sure I'm fully equipped to speak on behalf of the radio industry here, but as far as I can see, it is market forces dictating what kind of music that people want to hear. So in a commercial sense, it's about identifying an audience and returning that audience.
So there is no constraint at all about music programming?
There's no constraints at all. So if there are French artists who are big in the UK for whatever reason, they will find their way onto UK radio. I personally would love to hear more Jean-Michel Jarre on UK radio, but I suspect I may be in a minority there.
Sia. Sia? You know Sia? She's French. Right.
And there was a station on DAB digital radio in London called French Radio London, which served the French community and played, I think, pretty much 100% French music. Sadly, it wasn't a commercial success and is no longer on DAB. I think it's still online, though, addressing the Francophone community in London.
Yeah. Right, so basically, there is no il n'y a pas de contrainte sur la programmation et c'est juste c'est le marché qui décide. Et donc, s'il y a des artistes français qui sont populaires dans le top 100, ils seront joués par les radios. Une question derrière. One question.
Hello. Is there a best advice in order to motivate volunteers in the long term and about also the age of the volunteers, because more and more associations, not only in the radio field, have difficulties to encourage and motivate volunteers in the long term.
Yeah, just picking up on your last point there, I think it's really important that a community radio station has a safeguarding policy in place, and it's a robust one that's been really thought through so that you can welcome young people and, of course, vulnerable adults as well. And I mentioned earlier that it's the culture that encourages volunteering. The approach I have taken is that everybody has something to offer. In fact, I have a little byline which is validity in all. So someone comes into my office with an idea, I will talk that through with them. So if you value what people want to contribute and you set that as the benchmark of your culture, I believe that you will get volunteers. You have to, at the same time though, identify resource to manage volunteers. And it's a sort of benevolent dictatorship, I would say, where you're taking into account the needs of volunteers and why they're there and what they aspire to do, and you set a culture in which they can thrive and achieve their aspirations. But that must come with a certain organisational approach to make the best of volunteer goodwill so that you've got a cohesive radio offer that will build audiences as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And also about the age.
Age
how
can
you manage with it? Because
sorry, was your question about what age they, in terms of their youth, that they should volunteer?
Yes.
Yes. My view on that is simple. At Summer Valley FM, we have a very robust safeguarding policy in place. We're closely linked with a school. So therefore, we don't have any barriers to entry on age. For the primary school children, sort of 7 to 12, they tend to be involved with us through group activity with staff support. I think you are old enough to volunteer at Summer Valley FM when you can take on that level of responsibility, and I'm not talking about legal responsibility, but emotional responsibility, so that you don't tumble around in the studios as if it was break time at school and you're in the playground. So we do expect a certain level of maturity, and I would say that young people from the age of 12 generally come to volunteer with us.
Okay, thank you.
Any other question? We are asked to stop. Okay, one last, and then we stop.
Hello, I would like to know why do you like exactly the French radio? Just because it's a very special and different style compared to the UK. And what do you like exactly about them?
Sorry, I'm not clear with
So
the question.
the first question is probably, do you like French radios? Do you know French radios?
I'm going to give a really personal answer here because I'm afraid, and I've said this before, that I don't speak your language. But I love hearing French talk. It's just the happiest audio wallpaper ever. And it's the same with my Italian friends as well. I do wonder, though, for French speakers who don't have English, so clearly you're an exception, Do people like hearing us? I suspect we have a rather harsher, more Germanic sounding voice to people who don't speak English. So maybe it's not the case. Do I like French radio? When I'm driving in France, I always tune in, and I just love the noises.
Voilà, we are going to finish here. Thank you very much, Will. Thank you very much, Dom.
The radio of the European Radio Show thanks its partners.